chapters 23 through 27 are taken together in nearly all of the commentaries, since these chapters deal with David's organization of the Levites, the musicians, gatekeepers, and leaders. So I've decided to treat these chapters like I did the first 9, which were pure genealogies, and we just looked at it more broadly, theologically. We didn't go through with a fine comb and comment on every single thing. So here we're going to look at the Levites and worship and some of the associated themes throughout these chapters and just kind of pick out some of the things that I found interesting. And one of those themes that I was most interested in was how the concept of musician and prophet overlap. And so we're going to hit a number of topics. I'll try to timestamp so you can move around if you're more interested in other topics within this discussion, but just kind of jumping into it. If you were to study the topics of Old Testament worship or the Levites or just worship in general in the book of Chronicles, you'll come across John Kleinig's work, specifically his book, The Lord's Song. So we'll interact with that book and with him quite a bit. Some of his lectures are online as well, so if you're interested in some of his material, you can just find some of his lectures. He's done a series of them that cover a lot of this material, so it's well worth a look. But we'll just begin, and we'll go ahead and take a look at just the overall structure of this section, these chapters. So beginning with John Stone in his commentary, he says, the laity mentioned first in 1 Chronicles 23, verse 2, are treated last in 1 Chronicles 27. They open and close the system and thus form the framework for the whole. This is appropriate, while the system of holiness managed and maintained by the Levites is the means. It is the role of Israel that is the end. And so we have this dual reference to the laity that forms kind of an inclusio on the whole passage. And moving to Lightheart, here he notes a chiastic structure. And remember, dealing with the broader theme of Chronicles, specifically First Chronicles, this section, chapters 23 through 27, itself are part of a bigger chiasm. So this is a good example of a chiasm within a chiasm. But in his commentary, he points out here that, as you can see, the Levites would be chapter 23, most of it. The laity, A prime, down here, chapter 27. The priests in chapter 24, B prime, the gatekeepers. And that puts at the center the musicians. We'll talk a bit more about the structuring, but we'll just take a look at what Lightheart says. He says, the arrangement is perhaps better described as an architectural literary structure. And this reminds me of Mary Douglas, her suggestion that Leviticus is a picture poem and that you can put the chapters around the frame of the temple. It's hard to describe without going into detail, but that's a whole other video. But if you look up her work in the structuring of Leviticus, it reminds me of that same kind of idea. He says the outer edges of the text list those who function in the outer parts of the temple. The Levites, A, who assist with sacrifices in the court but never enter the house, and the lay Israelites, A prime, who also enter only the court. The priests, B, work in the house itself, and the gatekeepers, B prime, guard entrances and exits. At the center of the literary structure is a list of Levitical musicians. Music is the center of the text, as music has become the center of Israel's worship. The architectural literary structure places music in the inner sanctuary at the ark. It is a literary portrait of the fact that Israel carried on the worship of the Davidic tabernacle. Song offered at the ark, even after the temple was finished. Song becomes the ark throne, as Psalm 22:3 indicates. You are holy, O you who are enthroned upon the praises of Israel. This music-centered segment forms a neat enclosure with 1 Chronicles 1 through 9, the genealogical sections, which also centers on musicians. Israel is a choral people, and the house of their God is a concert hall, with music in the middle, a new form of sacrifice. So like I said, this section, though, is itself centered on the musicians, chiastically. But this section itself isn't the center of the larger chiasm of 1 Chronicles. The actual center was chapters 15 through 17. But those chapters dealt with the movement in finally establishing the Ark of the Covenant by the Levites, and David establishing musicians to minister before the Ark. So it wouldn't be an overstatement to say that worship is the center of Chronicles. But continuing on the theme of structure, Japhet has some comments. She says, in their general topic, chapters 23 through 29, she includes chapter 28 and 29, but she says it constitutes a parallel to the enthronement of David when the kingdom was turned over to him as Saul's successor. On that occasion, the author referred in great detail to the military and to the way in which the various martial groups joined David, presenting the broadest military picture in the history of Israel. The occasion of the enthronement of Solomon is taken to provide the broadest organizational picture, both secular and clerical. This is one expression of the changing times, a transition from a time of war to a time of peace. And this was a theme that we hit a bit in the last video. The idea that David giving way to Solomon followed the Moses to Joshua typology. It's kind of a death and birth idea. But I read her comments here because it reminded me of an issue going all the way back to the chapter 11 video. So if you followed along since chapter 11, again, as we previously also noted here in this video, that there is a chiastic structure going from chapter 11 all the way to the end of First Chronicles. And I remember making the comments in the chapter 11 video that I didn't think B and B prime were a very tight connection. But now, after studying out these chapters, 23 through 27, or up to 29 in Japhet's case, I see that these latter chapters do mirror the military organization of David. And so it actually does fit quite nicely. I hadn't noticed that until I looked at this section again. But now we will turn to a different matter, something that occurs quite commonly in Chronicles. So it's this good king, bad king motif. That isn't really a term. I just kind of made that up right now. But you'll see what I'm getting at here in a moment. So first we'll turn to Lightheart's commentary. He says, we can grasp the significance of these chapters by noting that Davidic assignment formulas are used elsewhere in Chronicles in the context of a national renewal. In 2 Chronicles 23, for instance, Jehoiada reestablishes the correct temple personnel following the debacle of Athaliah. A Davidic assignment formula legitimates the new system that accompanies the change in regimes, referring to 1 Chronicles 23, 28 through 24:19 and 26, 1 through 19. And this is all rights material. The same formula is used in Chronicles account, or in the Chronicler's account of Hezekiah. So Wright concludes that this section here, chapters 23 through 27, describe the foundational establishment of temple personnel and provides the basis of a motif that runs throughout Chronicles. And so this is the point that I was getting at. And this is important. Again, it was kind of wordy up there, but the point is this. The establishment of temple personnel during the reigns of good royal figures. Good kings repair the physical temple. Good kings also provide for the maintenance of ongoing temple service. Since Israel is called as a priestly nation, the reorganization of a temple or of temple personnel is essential to restoring Israel to its proper calling among the nations. And this is more or less what I meant by the good king, bad king motif. Good kings maintain the temple, and bad kings bring foreign, unsanctioned innovations, and that leads to the degradation of the temple. But this latter point by Lightheart is very interesting. He loops into the discussion the priestly calling of the nation of Israel. And I have been skimming through this dissertation by a fellow named Ming Him Ko. It's a 2014 dissertation, and the title of it is Sing for Covenantal Stability. The subheading is The Worldwide Significance of the Service of Levitical Singers in the Book of Chronicles. But even that title should kind of clue you into why I bring it up. In part of the dissertation, he establishes the idea that the temple, and this would be true of other religions, but the temple is the earthly counterpart to the heavenly temple or reality. And I actually talked about this on the last video I uploaded on John's Gospel and the way John has Jesus associated with the heavenly temple. It's worth checking out, but that theme comes up in this dissertation. But the point he's making is that the temple serves as the gateway to the other side. And so when the Israelites are orthodox and they're worshiping, to borrow Jesus' phrase, in spirit and truth, this had cosmic implications. Order is maintained when you do this properly. There's harmony in the universe. When Israel is idolatrous, though, chaos ensues. And that's what goes on throughout Chronicles. And frankly, I think that that's what's going on broadly speaking, because a lot of scholars will note the differences between the kingdom books, Kings and Samuel, and Chronicles, and they'll always make this oversimplification that it's about whitewashing the history. It really isn't at all. The grid, I think, that the chronicler sees the kings through is the temple. And whether, again, were they orthodox or did they bring in these foreign innovations? And that's what determined whether they were good or bad. Because again, David had some serious failings. The ones that are brought up in Chronicles are the ones where he fails liturgically or in things that concern the temple or the Levites, something to that effect. This is a point that I think needs to be hammered a bit more, especially with discussion on Chronicles, because it just gets oversimplified. But I think that this is the broader lens to see the book through. That's why I think it's so important, is it's about orthodox proper worship. That's really at the heart of the matter of Chronicles. And in fact, that's an interesting segue, because we have to confront and answer this question of where did the music and the singers come from in Israel's worship? Because it wasn't explicitly sanctioned in the Pentateuch. So how was music in the temple not considered an innovation? But there are a couple of trajectories that the chronicler took. So here's where we'll start interacting with Kleinig's work. In page 149 of his book, he says a number of prophets were particularly prominent in the establishment of David of public worship at Jerusalem. While Nathan had decreed that David's son would build a temple there, Gad commanded David to build an altar at the site at which the Lord had designated for the temple, whereas Samuel organized the gatekeepers for their duties. Nathan and Gad instituted sacred song at the Lord's command. Prophecy was therefore responsible for the establishment of the temple and the arrangement of its personnel, just as it had founded and confirmed the Davidic dynasty. The choral rite was thus regarded as a product of prophecy, and that's very important there. So it wasn't just a pure innovation on David's part. The prophets were deeply involved with all of these decisions. Additionally, Kleinig argues in pages 32 and 33 of his book, he's going to point out the fact that the Levites had the temporary task of transporting the ark in chapter 15. Remember, when they finally successfully moved the ark in chapters 15 through 17, again, the center of the chiasm of First Chronicles, and then they're installed there to minister before the Lord, before the ark. So that led to that permanent task. So they temporarily moved the ark. There's this festive music during the procession of the movement of the ark, but they are permanently assigned to minister before the ark. And then in addition to that, the chronicler also looped in Numbers 10:10. And this, the passage broadly is talking about the use of holy trumpets on holy days, and it was sounded over the offerings and sacrifices. So it's kind of the exegesis of that passage, and additionally what David had previously done with the movement of the ark. And then additionally, you have the prophets consulting with David to institute sacred song and their liturgy. And so therefore it is a product of all these things. It wasn't just David doing so. But moving on, again, you have this pretty tight connection actually with the idea of the musicians with prophets, with being prophets. Here in page 149, Kleinig says that the three original heads of the guilds were called seers. Again, so you have a pretty tight connection there. While their designation as the king's seers shows that they held some office in the royal court in 1 Chronicles 25, 1 through 6. But additionally, in the New Testament, he points out a number of interesting things. He says, we find this equation of praise with prophecy in Luke 167 and in the rabbinical material. It seems also to be implied by the connection between inspiration by the Spirit and praise in Luke 2:27 through 35, 10:21 and 22, and Ephesians 5:18 through 20. This one's actually a really interesting text in that regard. Similar ideas seem to lie behind the description of David as a prophet in Mark 12:36, Acts 2:20 and 4:25, and Asaph as a prophet in Matthew 13:35. There is also a close connection between apocalyptic prophecy and praise in the book of Revelation. The praise of Almighty God and the Lamb by the saints together with the heavenly host seems to set in motion the great eschatological deeds envisaged by the seer. So if you read Revelation pretty closely, you'll notice this happens quite a bit, that you have worship in heaven, and then that seems to trigger the events on earth, whatever is happening, a number of different things, even the judgments and so on and so forth. And he also continues, more New Testament themes, so that this is actually a section, a subheading section, the replacement of David by Jesus as the leader of praise in the New Testament. And he says, it seems to me that the tradition of David as the patron of praise at the temple in Jerusalem may have influenced the belief of the early Christians that Jesus was the leader of praise in their worship. Thus, in Hebrews 2:12, the words of Psalm 22:23, which are ascribed to David, describe how Jesus proclaims his name, or the name of his Father, and praises him in the liturgical assembly. And he says, compare this to Romans 15:9. By the way, I can't help but point this out. If you're on my channel, you probably know that Michael Heiser recently passed away. This passage actually was, I heard him say in different contexts that this was one of his favorite passages. That he said he's not a very emotional guy, but that this passage always got to him because if you read it, especially with a divine council view, what's happening here is you basically have Jesus bringing you into the council, like inducting you into the council as his brother, which is just really, really interesting. Continuing on, he says, just as David had given his words to the Levitical singers in 1 Chronicles 16:7-36, for them to use in praise, so the word of Jesus said in Colossians 3:16 to provide the content of the songs sung by his disciples in their instruction and encouragement for each other. And now I want to talk a little bit about the theology of music, just more broadly. And Lightheart's commentary, he has a lot of great stuff here. This is really where Lightheart shines, is in this kind of stuff. But in page 80 and 81 of his commentary, he says, Plato said that purification is a science of division. So is creation. In Genesis, God forms the formless by separating. He divides, and it's the Hebrew term badal, light from darkness to form a temporal structure of evenings and mornings, and waters from water to create a vertical spatiality. He delegates the creative work of dividing the day and the night to the heavenly bodies, which rule and signify in part by separating. After Genesis 1, the Hebrew verb badal is not used again until Exodus, when the Lord instructs Moses to erect a veil as a divider between the holy place and the most holy. And that's Exodus 26:33. It is another creative act delegated this time to a human being. By erecting the firmament boundary between holy and most holy, Moses reforms the world, a world that previously was not mapped by the separation of holy and profane is now mapped by that separation. Torah requires not only the creative division of space, but also the creative division of persons. Israel is separated, badal, from the peoples as Yahweh's own. That's Leviticus 20:24 and verse 26. And he says also compare this to 1 Kings 8:53. Within Israel, Levites are separated from the other tribes, Numbers 8:14, and the priests are distinguished from the rest of the Levites in Numbers 16:9. Priests are guardians of created order because they are responsible for creating and maintaining the divisions between holy and profane, unclean and clean, Leviticus 10:10. They create holiness boundaries by rites of consecration. They create purity boundaries by pronouncing people clean and unclean, like Yahweh forming the creation by word. Chronicles records yet another recreative division. 1 Chronicles 23:13 repeats Torah's claim that the sons of Aaron were divided off, badal, as most holy, like the veil separating the holy place from the most holy place. Yahweh's choice of Aaron is a separating choice, a division within the holy people that consecrates one family as most holy. 1 Chronicles 25:1 presents an innovation. Within the tribe of Levi, David and the commanders of the host are set apart, badal, the sons of Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, for the ministry of song. In Chronicles, only the priests and singers are set apart, a datum that calls attention to the parallels of priestly and musical ministry, of sacrifice, and the sacrifice of praise. More, the division of singers from the rest of the Levites is yet another fresh creation within the new creation that is Israel, forming a specialized company of singers and musicians at the heart of the temple, repeats the first moments of creation, when the morning stars sang together. Inspired by the Spirit, they are seer singers. And much of that could have been summarized. In fact, one of the dissertations I've been reading could be summarized by Johnstone here in his commentary. He says, the function of music cannot be stated more loftily. It is nothing less than prophesying. And he points out here that the ancestors of the musicians are said to prophesy or are called seers. Through the medium of liturgy, the word of God is imparted to the worshiping community. In this ideal presentation, those who are set apart are thereby empowered to be direct channels of communication between God and the people. It is in response to the actions of the Lord now expressed in word and appropriated in liturgical action that the thanksgiving and hymn of the congregation are raised. And so really take in what it's saying here. The words are now being essentially put to music, and that the musicians they're now the channel through which that communication takes place between God. And so it's really important. I mean, it's prophecy. They're prophesying now. And in fact, the dissertation that I referred to earlier, he goes quite a bit into the looking at the Levites as a special class of scholar singers, as he calls them. And he compares this to other ancient cultures that more or less had this. But it's very interesting because there is quite a bit of work that these Levites and the scholar singers did. They did a lot of different things. They wore a lot of hats, and it actually makes sense to see them through that lens. Very interesting dissertation. I do want to hit on a couple more things. So Kleinig, getting more into kind of the nuts and bolts. I don't want to go too deep into it, but I think this is pretty important. So he says, the members of the congregation did not remain passive spectators at the performance of the choral service on their behalf by the Levitical choir. The choir addressed them directly and invited them to join in its praise. And he points to 1 Chronicles 16, 8 through 13. The congregation did so by responding with certain stereotyped words and refrains. It thereby became an active pattern or partner rather in praise. So you get a lot of these psalms where like his love endures forever and things like that. Like there's kind of this call response thing going on, and that's kind of what he's pointing at. So David decrees that the Levitical musicians were to offer thanks and praise whenever the public burnt offerings were offered there. And now this coupling of praise with the presentation of the burnt offerings is even more remarkable, since, as Rentorf rightly maintains, the act of burning constituted the chief part of the ritual for that sacrifice, because this arrangement resulted from the deliberate regulation rather than by accident. It would seem that, for Chronicles, the performance of praise somehow complemented the presentation of burnt offerings. It was thus not a peripheral undertaking conducted, as it were, at the fringes of the sacrificial system, but it was attached to the very center around which everything else revolved. Again, music becomes the center of their worship, essentially. And lastly, I want to point this out just because I found it really interesting. So in the section in, I believe it's chapter 25, I think it's specifically verse 5, but Kleinig points it out, but we'll pick up with Japhet, but she has a nice summary of this issue. She says, the sons of Heman are 14, but it was noticed long ago that only the first 7 bear names which actually conform to the practices of the biblical onomasticon, which sounds like a dinosaur to me. But anyway, while the last 7 are unusual in their formulation. 4 are verbs, 1 is an invocation, and 2 are of extremely irregular form. Some of these have remained completely unaccountable. The verse has attracted a great deal of attention. It has been shown that from Hananiah onward, the names actually join to form short poetical verses. Several attempts have been made to reconstruct them as an opening part of a psalm. Indeed, the first part can be smoothly read as such. Be gracious to me, O Lord, be gracious, thou art my God. But this clarity deteriorates as we proceed, and it has been suggested recently that the words do not add up to a continuous lyric piece, but to incipits of hymns sung by the Levitical singers. And that was Jacob Myers. And here's the Jacob Myers? Myers, I can't remember his first name. Here's the section of his commentary where he brings it up. And here's kind of the full translation. It continues on. I have magnified and I will exalt my helper. Sitting in adversity, I said, clear signs give plentifully. And as he points out, this is what Japhet was referring to as it breaks down the further down you go. Myers points out, though, that again here it could be incipits, which are like introductions. The existence of hymn catalogs has now been demonstrated in abundance, and he lists some scholars that have discussed this. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Another interesting part of that, though, is that Heman, again, has 14 sons. And if you follow along, I'm not going to get into Labuschagne's work in this video because it's probably already too long, but 14 is the numerical value of David. And it's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But then I also noticed he also had 3 daughters, and that's explicitly mentioned, which gives him 17 children, which is 17 is the value of one of the values of the divine name Yahweh. But I just thought that I was like, wow, that's really bizarre because this, like I said, or like the commentaries have said, it's received a lot of attention because it's just so weird. Those names just seemingly come out of nowhere. But that is this section, and I believe next time we'll probably jump back into doing kind of what we've been doing, just commenting along. But I will see you guys next time.